About Time essay, South Australia's History Festival. I've got to think about that each time I look at it. So welcome to everybody, and particularly to visitors tonight, and we've got quite a lot of them, which is great to see. Our guest speaker tonight is Richard Heathcote, and Richard, quite recently, early this year I think, wasn't it, Richard?
Yes, it was.
His book on Carrick Hill was published.
I dashed it off over Christmas.
Did you? Over Christmas? I think it might have taken a little bit longer than that. Richard's talk tonight is about Marble Hill, life at the Vice-Regal Summer Residence. To give you a bit of background on Richard, Richard is director of Carrick Hill, and as I said, Wakefield Press have recently published his book entitled Carrick Hill, A Portrait. Richard previously managed Ripponlea Estate in Melbourne, which I guess a number of people here will have visited over the years. Richard's primarily a garden historian and focuses most of his talks around gardens, and tonight he's going to look at the first of 5 of the governors who created the gardens at Marble Hill and their life there. So thank you, Richard. I'll pass over to you. This microphone's an absolute pain.
Is it? Thank you very much. Thank you, Geoffrey. It's lovely to be here. I thought we'd be in a chilly room with about half a dozen of us, so... Are you sure you're the right thing? Good. Just before we get underway, this talk was originally prepared, and you can see it's 2011. Research has continued, and some of it's shoved into the talk. But I was working for, in a voluntary capacity, the Garden History Society, and I must give them a little plug. They have a very fine journal. Can you all see that? Yes. That's a tire swan from my tire swan collection. So I have a particular double interest in promoting this. I'll ask somebody to put this on the back table so that if you want afterwards to have a look. So my, can I give that to you? A young historian in the front row, could I do? Thank you very much. Good. My particular interest as a garden historian is the social use of the garden. And of course, that can extend from my favourite habit of sitting in an armchair and reading about gardens to that total exertion which is chopping down trees to tame the bush, to make it into a garden, and everything in between. And this talk primarily looks at a number of governors who've tackled this. Now, there are men who are greater than me in this field, and there's a formidable couple in the front row here who are listening and scrutinising everything, because my link to Marble Hill is twofold. One is, I think it's an extraordinary experiment. An experiment to recreate the spirit of a place that is so much a part of South Australia's history. And secondly, to use two very talented men to help them do it. So I know a bit later on, I think Ed and Patricia will get a spot to promote Michael Queel and Trevor Nottle, who are working on the landscape and the architecture of the place in this great effort to reconstruct, recreate, to do a grand design. So I'll leave that to others to talk, but there are specialists working in very interesting ways. Okay, so as you can tell from my accent, I have some connection with the old country, with the imperial centre of the Western world for 200 or 300 years. And in fact, isn't it interesting how Kate and Wills have recreated the younger generation's interest in the monarchy, or should I say the crown? And I noticed that Madonna has just released a film called W.E., looking at the exploits of Edward VIII and his bit on the side, and then his consort, and then of course his Duchess in exile. There is a kind of groundswell of interest in this thing, and we have to pay attention to that, because this talk looks very much at how this garden was made, how this place came about as an expression of the imperial prestige that South Australia under Governor Jervis decided it should be. He decided to up the ante, and the state, as you'll hear, was cashed up. So let's have a look. Let me give you some interesting background to this. So there have been 15 governors during the 76 years that Marble Hill was the vice-regal, or the summer residence for the governor to retreat to from the hot, dusty and uninspiring plains. And
It needs to see the projector, which we can't see.
put the laptop on the floor. Oh, that's good. Okay. Thank you very much. I can. Yes. Wasn't it so much easier with the lantern slides? And you're a historical society. What have you got this for? Good. Yes. So 76 years. Let's just return to that Victorian era when South Australia was getting going and had got going. 1860 was when Belair Cottage was established as the place that the governor might like to go for a cooler summer. But why was this happening? Well, of course, people took their place in the social order and they looked up to what should be fashionable and what they should do. And so who does a governor look to? He looks to his empress. And his empress was spending her summers at Balmoral. Here it is, 1848. It's just a small fishing lodge on the side of the Dee where you can spin a trout and catch a few fish. You can go for lovely cool walks in the fir forests and so on. And you can even, if you have a few friends further up, you can go stalking stags. And in winter you can ice skate and play curls. Interesting game, curling. Any curlers amongst us in the audience here? Glenn. I knew you had a hidden depths when it came to physical recreation. Good. Here's Balmoral in autumn. Natural beauty. One of the reasons we place our homes in a garden, or a garden surrounds our homes, we haven't all chosen to build our homes, they are things we bought, is that, of course, you get in touch with the seasons and with the wildlife, some of which we don't want in Australia, of course. They don't have any problem with possums in Scotland, But in summer, you want a slightly different environment, don't you? You want to pop off to the coast. So here we are at Osborne on the Isle of Wight, acquired in 1845, and with her great beloved Prince Alfred, who designed half of this under the Palladian neoclassical attempt to recreate a little bit of Italy down there on the south coast of England. Not the bit on the right, incidentally. That came later. And there, of course, princes and kings engaged in yachting and going to the beach, and dare one say, even sea bathing. The children at this site, all those princesses and princesses, there are about 13 of them, had a Swiss chalet in which to have their smoko or morning tea, and where they kept their monogrammed gardening tools and wheelbarrows. Anybody been to Osborne? It's terrific. It's a good spot. Wonderful place for children. If you've got a tribe of 13, it'll be quite useful. And of course, there is that great imperial moment about 10 to 3 when you've all got to make sure you're there for mother to take up the pot and pour your tea for you to add lemon or milk to. Hope none of you put the milk in first. But this is probably the most interesting one, 1862, mainly because I grew up 7 miles away from Sandringham, which is the traditional Christmas retreat for the royal family. It's where George V first broadcast his Christmas messages, and you've all seen the King's speech, so you've seen actually inside Sandringham, and we're not dealing with the insides today, we're dealing with the outsides. But there the royal family go because they love horses. They probably love horses more than each other. And they hate most of the rest of the wildlife. They love shooting ducks and pheasants and the odd state worker who gets in the way. So, when our eminent Lieutenant General Sir William Jarvis, GCMG, CB, 1873 to 1883 for his time here, and you all know from Westminster that GCMG means God calls me God. It's the top gong. He was the top man. He'd been a Royal Engineer. He'd served in Canada and India and Burma and Singapore, and he was the man responsible for having Fort Glanville and Fort Largs constructed. He was going to make sure, damn sure, that this colony was going to hold its own should the Russians pop down from the Indian Ocean and take over. But he did feel that schlepping up to Belair for a weekend in the cottage was not quite his due. He'd had an eminent career, and he thought that he was worth a bit more. And more importantly, persuaded the South Australian government, which was awash with funds. So just here he is. Look at that. You wouldn't want to argue with him, would you? He persuaded the South Australian government, which was awash with funds, through the grain trade. Grain in the 1870s had really filled the coffers, that they should build a suitable summer residence for him to retreat to. The heat of the city was unbearable, the smells, so on and so forth. He needed a rest and an opportunity for some privacy. People could actually present their cases to the governor. They could bang on his front door and demand to see him, and it all had to be dealt with. He had aides, of course, to deal with that. But there was a certain accessibility. You were an administrator, and therefore, getting away from the rabble that was at the gate was quite important. Now, the site was selected despite, here he is at his full gongs. Here's God calls me God. There he is. Not a man to meddle with. They're awake. It was a site a long way away, several hours up a long and winding road. Not a promising site upon which to mount a 66-room mansion to be built in the academic Gothic style by Macmin. He had been the design wit behind the Mitchell building for the university and for Mount Kraken. I think we can, here's the full works. This was the plan, rather beautiful steel engraving with its terraces. I won't go into the full, I'll be telling you about the plants and what it's all about a bit later, but we're looking at this, Mount Kraken. And incidentally, this is the first of some slides, some images that possibly nobody in this room has ever seen before, because I'm very lucky through the help of Alison Reynolds, who's in the audience, yes, who put me in touch with some ladies who have a unique photo album, which I'll explain a little more about a bit later. But this particular picture comes from that album, assembled by Lady Victoria Buxton, but she comes a bit later. So here it is. So this has suffered many ignominies in its time, including the fate of Marble Hill. It was burnt, but it was refurbished and restored back to its full glamour, and I think it's recently changed hands, but I'm not sure about that. So Marble Hill was being erected between 1878 and 79, at exactly the same time that the other two buildings were being put together. And the first residents of this site were actually the 40 stonemasons and quarry workers and general chaps for lugging and shifting things that had to actually deal with all the horses that were dragging the stone and the material and all the equipment up this long and winding track. It took about 2 hours to get up the hill once you got to it from the plains. And of course they had a fair number of horses at the top, because they did open a quarry at the top and they did quarry from that quarry, and they had to have somewhere to put the machines. The machines were called horses, and these were the stables where they went. So the first social use of the garden was actually not so social. It was the great union that men and horses had and had to have and did have throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century. This is a little picture again from that album I was telling you about, showing that every single vehicle moving through the city was towed by a horse, except those wagons and carts that men or boys pushed. Girls, you didn't have to do much in those days. All the heavy lifting was done by us. Glad that's all done, and you can take part too. So all transportation was horse-drawn. Right. Can you see that? I want to just introduce you to the fact that not only did the place and its scale and its position and its grandeur take its lead from the imperial headquarters in London and in and amongst the shires where the other houses we've just seen, but the way that you should behave and the sports and activities that you should be engaged in should also be set by the monarch and the court circle. And one of the sports of kings, apart from horse racing, it's very difficult to do that on a hill called so far away, but you could actually play polo. And this is a very fine set of polo players, a polo team. You can see they have a couple of sub-military chaps on the left-hand side who are there to help with the once they dismount and for getting the fresh mounts. And interestingly, the first game of polo in Adelaide was played just below Montefiore Hill, and the Adelaide Polo Club was formed there. And a man I'm interested in, Robert Barr Smith, of course, was one of the first subscribers to the club and one of the first players. It's not so difficult to imagine that people would want to play polo in these towns because everybody had to be a horseman or horsewoman as part of life, not as a skill that you use socially. But there we are. Whoops. But this is a bit more like it, isn't it? This is what we really think polo players are like. The other lot were probably the sort of miscellaneous ex-colonial officers who had found their way to Australia, having served in the Indian subcontinent or wherever, and were on their pensions or whatever, or just weren't allowed back home. But these are the sorts of chaps that would gather at the Adelaide Club and decide to thrash those men from the Western Districts. Good. And there's a whole range of other things that you could do too in your garden. I'm just below where I work, Carrick Hill. Peter Waite, hosted the Hunt Club, and the hounds came, and people came, and drinks were served, and some poor native creature would be hunted down, and all the rest. And there were other things. Yes. There are tremendous views from Marble Hill, and the picturesque movement was still very much in vogue. The picturesque, which began in Britain in the 18th century when Europe was closed off because of the various amounts of biffo and war making that was going on. You couldn't go on the Grand Tour and see the Alps and the lakes and then make your way down to the brothels of Rome and Venice and have a great time. Couldn't do that anymore. I don't know what women did on the Grand Tour. I don't think they went. Anyway, Gilpin, a priest, not a priest, but he did have a friend who was a priest, decided that during this lapse of European travelling that one should look to places like the Wye Valley and the Lake District and a number of other places of great dramatic and natural beauty, and that the picturesque should take a particular interest in two dynamics. One was that a place could be merely beautiful, and the other is that it could be, and I'm going to have to try and remember the word, just a minute. Anybody else know a lot about the picturesque? Good, yes, I'll come back to that. No, it's here, it's in the notes. Don't panic. It could be sublime. Dramatic pause. Now, sublime isn't, Sublime is looking down that great gorge and seeing the water tip over. Sublime is seeing this wonderful view from Marble Hill and the flames and smoke of the bushfire coming towards you. It was nature's overwhelming power and force. So one of the reasons this site may have been chosen was that it was not only a place of remote natural beauty, but it had, not the bushfires, but it had this other sense of being charged with this great natural energy, or the drama of the landscape of these great spaces and hills being pushed up by geology in the past. A wild place, shall we say. Okay. There are more sedate things that both sexes could take part in. This is toxophilae. Have we got any archers amongst us? No? Oh, how poor. I would have thought a society of this strength would have. This is taken in Palmerston in about the 1880s. This is the Palmerston Archery Club. It goes down Palmerston and built Darwin instead, but here they are in full tog. Ladies shot from about 40 yards, men from 50, 60 and 70, and they're participating in that great civilizing habit. Now, archery was a sport that was held in high regard because the King or Queen's bodyguard was made up of the Royal Company of Archers. So it was felt to be a socially superior sport, and also was good for both sexes. Men, it was a mixed sport. Men and women could both join archery clubs and do it together, if you know what I mean. Oops. There you go. So I thought this is Amazonic, isn't it? This is in the 1950s. This is one of the great lady champions of toxophilae. And there is, if you didn't want to engage in that kind of fearsome activity, you could do something much more lethal, like be good at croquet. Yes. So these are the kinds of social sports that one's garden could be used for and were used for. And these are the kinds of things that Governor Jervis was interested in. But he also painted. As a soldier, he would have been interested in topography, on how the land lay, and how, as an engineer, he was going to get troops and equipment and supplies from one place to another. So he had some skill at drawing and at watercolouring. And this is the little turning circle, not a grand spot, but he has represented the gum tree in quite a reasonable way. Others before him had not. And so this is one of the earliest artist's impressions of Marble Hill. And watercolour and drawing and sketching was very much a part of a young woman's life, young lady's life, but it was a very practical pastime for men. And generally, if you were a soldier, very useful. No cameras are issued by the army until much later. Good. Now, I think I have let me just get my pages right. Let's see. Yes, we're going to have a switch now. Yes, these are some shots which I'm very pleased that the West Torrens Historical Society. East. Oh. How is West doing these days? The Right Honourable Hallam Baron Tennyson brought his family, quite a large family, lots of boys, lovely wife, between 1899 and 1902 were in Australia. He actually became our first Governor-General and moved to Melbourne. But Lady Audrey was a power. She's so pleased to come to South Australia so her boys could grow up amongst their own family and not at some terrible boarding school. And she thought that Marble Hill was just the thing. She had a huge enthusiasm for it. And there's a very good book published of her letters back to her mother. And if you look on the net, you can it's a second-hand book now, it's out of print. You can pick up a copy. She said things like, "I spent a peaceful hour together in the veranda with our feet in the sun and our heads in the shade, and with the blue spectacles on, for the glare was dreadful. And we sat there gazing at our wonderful and beautiful view." So, let me just get this right. Where are we? Yes. So she's talking about sitting up here with Hallam. because he was a terribly conscientious man. His father, of course, had driven him absolutely mad as poet laureate and a great romantic man, and his son had to act as his secretary. And then, of course, after his father died, what does the son of a famous man do? He inherited the title, and he decided to serve his country. It's got to be said, taking up a governorship was not an inexpensive thing. You had to bring your own furniture, you had to hire your own servants, you had to actually organise the social life of the colony around you being the highest strata of it. So for a family to be able to escape to a little retreat where nobody could get you unless they rode hard for 2 hours was quite a good thing. She was onto it. She had 3 boys, Harold, Aubrey and Lionel, and they loved Marble Hill. I and the boys are able to do everything together up here, and all their lives I'm afraid I shall look back at the time spent at Marble Hill as some of the happiest of my life. Captain Wallington to play cricket with them every single evening. Now, Captain Wallington was the aide-de-camp to Hallam, the governor, and he'd played for Oxford University first 11. It's just, crisp and classic boys' own stuff, isn't it? December 1902. Yesterday, we and the boys and I rode, and Hallam drove Harold in the pony cart. For tea, we picnicked, boiled a billy, and ate bread and butter. There you go. Now, Marble Hill was used for a number. They did actually engage with the local community. They didn't divorce themselves. They went off. I think we've got a picture of the church, but this, I had to have this in. This is an at-home. You understand at-homes. You've all read your 19th century social protocols, haven't you? And this is the Garden Society. So already we have this sense of it being a special place, even though it's slightly more relaxed. It still entertains, and you're still the governor, but it's done in a slightly softer, easier time. This is the only shot you'll get of the inside. And the reason I've got it here is because the other thing you could do is, it was quite hard gardening up there, but you'll see some terraces a little later on. The main value, the main excitement was the fact that, you were right next to the bush, and these great trees were there, and they did plant a lot of trees too. But there was a small picking garden, and there were terraces with floral arrangements on it, and here some have made their way into the house, onto this highly polished table. So that's your lot for the interior. Good. This is what it's really about. And this is where Harold and Aubrey and Lionel went out and did all sorts of things that boys can do in the garden. They explored and discovered. They built tree houses. They went bird nesting. And I believe at some point they did go shooting, what they called turkey shooting. But we'll come to that. I'll just give you a couple, just before we pass on from the Tennysons, who really were quite remarkable. I must give a plug to another book. I don't know if any of you have come across this. Stephanie Williams Running the Show. Very finely researched. It's actually about how government houses were run throughout the world during the British Empire. And there's a very large section in it on Adelaide and Marble Hill, on the Tennyson's time. So if you're interested in the kinds of things I've been saying, this is the book for you. And I've met Stephanie, and she's very sharp. Good. So just before we leave the Tennysons, such a lovely, delicious day, extolling the virtues of the air from the veranda, a soft, warm air, and views all looking perfect. This is you can tell how Audrey fell for it. Oh, I must just tell you one other thing. Adelaide Royal Visit, the Duke and Duchess of York in 1901. Sunday. A showery afternoon, but go up to Marble Hill, all wildly enthusiastic about the beauty of the drive and the scenery and Marble Hill itself. It's an endorsement from the mothership. Okay, we're going to go now to this wonderful album that came my way. I don't own it. It's still in the hands of the family, the descendants of Lady Victoria Buxton, who some of you will know about. She was, of course, the wife of... sorry, I just need to get my notes in order here. The wife of Sir Thomas Buxton. And both he and her were philanthropists of the highest order. They gave a portion of their income and their inheritance every year to good works. And this is very important because she took on raising money for Girls' Home. That was her particular charity and one that she was famous for. And the Kookaburra Cookbook was developed by her as a great fundraising activity to raise money for this. So they were people with a very strong and deep social conscience. But they didn't find it difficult to use Marble Hill. And in this album that you see, there were photographs that actually depict their journey out and then their time at here she is, her time at Government House. And here we see some other pastimes. I'm not sure this took place at Marble Hill. It would be quite a place to bicycle to. I think even the boys in Lycra might have a little trouble with the gradients. But who knows, don't challenge them. Actually, there's no coffee up at Marble Hill, is there?
On open days.
Ah, yes. But, you know, the bush did come to North Terrace, a friendly kangaroo. And here they are. Now, he was a bit highly strung and got overwrought, and so she had to look after him. And so she was delighted that there was this retreat. And they were Anglicans, so they went to the local church at Uradla, and they invited the vicar and his wife to come back to their place. She did remark that on the 3rd of January in 1896, after returning to Marble Hill, having visited Renmark, where it was 120 degrees in the shade, that Marble Hill was delicious to get back to, this cool place in the hills, so they did value it. Now, here you can just see, at the bottom of the picture, is the tennis court. Now, tennis supplanted lawn croquet in the 1880s, but Marble Hill didn't have a lawn tennis court. The first tennis court was a cinder affair. It's like we would call it now a clay court, ashlar or compounded dirt. And that's the looking back up to the mansion from the court. So you can see it's been cut into the... And again, it was a game played both by men and women socially. Of course, it was the Wimbledon Lawn Croquet Association that first championed tennis and made it a vigorous and competitive sport in a bid to drive new members into this very large and beautifully kept place they owned at Wimbledon. And here's a shot of a family having a tennis afternoon. This is actually a shot of the Sargood family at Ripon Lee, taken about 1885. Beautiful thatched summer house, little rustic place to shelter in the shade while the others are belting it out on the court. Probably also a place to have your barley water and those sorts of things. Can't remember who that is. But there's a certain informality about Marble Hill that you couldn't get away with on the plains. And Lady Victoria, as we've known, Victorian ladies developed skills in watercolour. There are 3 very beautiful watercolours in the album, never before seen. You're seeing them tonight. A little bit of foxing around the end. These are tipped in. And you can get a very strong sense of how she felt about it. It's open, it's airy. The gum tree gets a special place. The verandas are there. The beds, the walks. You had to be very careful as a young Victorian gal or woman. You couldn't go on walks by yourself. You had to have somebody with you. Even in the bush, people could leap out and shock you. So you either had to have a chaperone or a companion. So the fact that there were rather beautiful walks, promenades around the base of the house was very useful. as is the veranda itself for all those lovely things you can do. And we don't know exactly who the gardeners are. We know there were gardeners. They varied. Not every governor had a passion for the garden or wanted to pay the expense of keeping it up. But you can see some quite extensive and well-organised gardening was being done. Here's another of her beautiful views, an attempt at a sunset, quite successful, I think. You can see some of the exotics being grown, and this idea that there was quite a lot of cultivation. So gardening, whoops, because it's vigorous, isn't it? There we are, and that's her third view. Quite accomplished, as you would expect. A few other things that you should just know about the Buxtons. Oh yes, there she is. He died fairly early, and she went on and on and on and on. She had great fortitude without her husband in Victorian life. Yeah.
Did she stay here or
No, they all went back. Postings, you never hung around. You just, well, have you ever talked to a career diplomat? They say, no, when the job's done, that's it. Nice seeing you all. See you later, bye. And they go. And so they didn't actually return, but they kept up with people. Correspondence. There's quite a lot of correspondence. I'll just read you no, I won't. We've got to get on, haven't we? What time is it? Here we are. Now it gets a bit tidier. We're going to go into the 20th century. When the Tennysons took up their posting as the first Governor-General and his lady in Melbourne, they did make it back a couple of times. Now, remember, the journey would have been arduous. You could probably catch a steamer, and I think they did. They didn't fancy coming overland, although they could by train, but there's still a fairly large amount of horse transportation and journeying over. Did they go to Stirling and then cross from there? I can't remember. I have to read the book again. But they were very pleased to come back. And in 1901, Christmas Day, let us have to go down to Adelaide tomorrow on horseback. Hallam, Lord Tennyson, riding the new cob he has brought. The boys at this moment are blissfully happy, redecorating the hall and the staircase with gum for tomorrow. That was on the 22nd of December 1902. But there were bushfires, of course. There they are. That's Hallam and his tribe, Lionel and Aubrey and Harold. I think, yeah, that's it. And the aide-de-camp, and in the background, the old cricketer. There he is. He's a bit faded on this picture, sorry, it's not quite so clear. There we go. And now, they had to honour men who, these are men, I think, from the Boer War. A brigade raised from Adelaide, and so they were invited to come to tea or whatever it is they did. Don't think, yeah. I mentioned that, it may have been pheasants and ducks shot at Sandringham, but when you're out in the bush, you just shoot anything you can, and it was called a turkey shoot. And I have asked the, it was avian massacre is what it was. I have asked the one of the ornithologists at the museum if he could identify the bird species, and he refused. He said it would be too pitiful to report on their destruction. I think you were a bit snobby, really, I thought. It's an historical artifact, isn't it? Oops, no, wrong button, Richard. Here we go. So just a few slides to get that sense, those of you who are gardeners. Do we have any gardeners in the audience? Anybody prepared to own up to being a gardener? Good. Margaret, good, thank you. Yeah, well, we look for evidence now, and I know the Michelles are keen gardeners. We look for evidence of what was there and how it worked and what it did, social use. Why do you have steps in a garden? Well, they're wonderful. They're a feature. They make it more interesting. You can climb up and down them and be elevated. But actually, they're very practical, because if you're on a hillside, you've got to get it to work for you, and it's such an opportunity to do all sorts of things. You put a pot on it, and suddenly, how good the Italians are about this. You all seen Monty Don's Italian gardens? Is there ever a garden without a pot? We're going to move now to one of our later chaps. We're going to go to Sir Willoughby Norrie, another soldier, Lieutenant General, KCMG, CB, DSO, MC, from 1944 to 1952, so just after the Second War. He had a daughter. I'll just have a look at some more pretty pictures. He had a daughter called Rosemary, who was a bit of a stunner. And Rosemary had to have a companion. We talked about this. This may be mid-20th century. You've still got to keep an eye on your daughter. So she had a companion called Eleanor Kerrans. And Eleanor and Rosemary got about. Here is Rosemary taken under that wonderful portrait of Queen Adelaide in Government House. So, she's got the full kit. She's got the ball grounds. She's got the looks. Dad's got a top posting. What are you going to do? Well, of course, keep dogs, don't you? Safe. Dogs allow you to go for walks. It's not so silly, is it? Look at the hydrangeas there. We're going to have hydrangeas. Oh, good. And they were great chums, weren't they? Here they are on the veranda, hugging their dogs, and lots of hair. This is the 40s. On the steps. So we talked about steps, formal steps, moving into informal steps. Don't think they were spending quite so much on the garden lower down, do you? Bit of weeding needed there. I don't think these were the girls for weeding. Lots of lovely things. Yeah, lots of birds to look at, lots of places to find. We do know that. Back. We do know that Rosemary took a big shine to one of Sir Willoughby's aides-de-camps, who was the very young Earl of Althorp, who you would all know as Princess Diana's father. He was very dashing, very smart, and she and he, I have a photo, small snap, didn't feel it was appropriate to put it in here because it takes us off down to other places, of them at the polo at Bacala. Anybody been to Bacala when it was a polo ground? Yes, I think it's now a soccer ground somewhere, isn't it? Yep. Well, she was very good at snogging, apparently. I had that on very good authority. Good. So now we're at our last governor, Air Vice Marshal Sir Robert George, KCMG, KCVO, KB, CB, MC. And his wife was Elizabeth. Remember that. Here we are. So this is Betty and Bobby. And I know that because this photograph sits in the drawing room at Carrick Hill, because the Georges were very, very good friends with the Haywards. They dined regularly. They shared a lot of interests, and they even came to stay at Carrick Hill, came for a weekend, getting away from that spot at the crossroads down on the plains. But there's a very, very extraordinary thing happened during the Georges' time. There was an earthquake in 1954, and Government House was pretty shaken up by it. So much so, the Georges decided that while it was being fixed, they would have all their possessions taken up the hill. Now, of course, motor vehicles can be used, up the hill to Marble Hill, and they would be resident there until the place was fixed up. The terrible thing was that on the 2nd of January 1955, Black Sunday, Marble Hill was hit by the most enormous bushfire. And it came very quickly through a change of wind. The aide-de-camp was sent up onto the roof to see how far off it could be seen, because there was a dust storm, there was smoke, and nobody could quite understand what was happening, except they did figure out, he was in the Air Force, that the wind had changed direction, it was coming towards them. From the roof cavities, when the door was opened, there was a smell and heat, and they found that the insulation, which was a seaweed, had caught fire, and that the ambient heat was so quick that the bushfire was leaping trees and exploding the fir trees and the gums around. So the heat was so intense that the leading on the roof was melting and dribbling down the walls. So they had to move very quickly. I mean, there were no CFS fire drills and keep all your close and wonderful things in a single bag. They had to get out, and the aide-de-camp and Sir Robert had the wit to take some wool blankets with them. They damped them down, and in the lee of part of what was then the drive, they actually tucked into the hillside, covered themselves with a blanket, and the fire went past. They escaped with their lives, and very little else. All their possessions, everything, was just destroyed in the fire. And Marble Hill really became a noble ruin after that. There is a plaque on the driveway that actually notes that place. And in a sense, that was the end of that era of Marble Hill's life. The National Trust, it must be said, took on the site from 1967 to 1992. They restored the tower. They ran a tea room from the stables. And it became a kind of classic trust experience to go up to the ruin at Marble Hill to take tea, to have a look at various displays that the West Torrens.
East of Adelaide. East Torrens.
Well, where's West?
West of Adelaide. The River Torrens
Is it on the left or the right?
is north at the top of the map.
Right.
If north is at the top of the map, west is to your left.
I'll talk about this later, shall I? East Torrens Society. So that was probably the third phase of its life. Sadly, the Trust had to relinquish their custodianship of Marble Hill because nobody wanted to put up the money to do the basic things to keep it safe and in order. I mean, their task, the Society's task, was to interpret it, to actually tell you about its significance and how it had meaning and what had happened there in the past. And the Trust, without some funds, could not sustain that. So here we are today, and a new future has arrived, a most interesting future. We're expecting Kevin McLeod any tick of the clock, because the state government, after a great deal of thought and report writing and considering, took, I think, what can only be a sensible decision, and have offered the land and the opportunity to build a Carrick Hill. And tonight we have Ed and Patricia Michelle, who've taken on that mighty task and have some very interesting ideas and a unique approach, have got some very good professionals in tow, and we do hope that we will see Marble Hill phoenix-like rise again. I think I shall probably pull up there and allow just a few minutes for questions, but I thank you for your patience and your indulgence, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have any questions from the floor? The question is, did they build the 66
No,
rooms?
they only built 40 rooms, the West Wing, which is why I keep getting so muddled, you see. I've always thought that
That's a poor
East Torrens
excuse.
Historical Society was in the West Wing, but they're not.
Can I correct that? They only built 26 rooms.
No, you're not allowed to correct it. I have the microphone and I'm in charge. I haven't at any point in this talk said that what I'm saying is accurate. And it's not a very interesting quality.
So the answer to your question is they built 26 rooms. Yep.
You're quite correct, actually. You're quite correct. My humble part. They were to build 40 and they only built 26.
What is the plan to rebuild it? What will it be its use? And will it be the same architecture as before?
I cannot say, but the people who can are here. And I think you should wait and see.
And I just should mention that the South Australian film A Time and Summer was Marble Hill featured in that in the 1968 black and white film.
Was it really? Sorry, which film again was that?
A Time and Summer. The State Library has a copy of it.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, good. I look forward to seeing it. I wasn't being flippant. I just think if you want to know about that, is this the moment, Patricia?
Perhaps,
Or at the end, Jeffrey?
I think at the end
we can offer you a
yeah.
real insight into what is going to happen. No, officially, there's a talk and a weekend set of speakers. So I'm just not going to talk about it because you're going to hear real things. You know how inaccurate I am. I don't even...
We're trying to improve you. That's why we're trying to nail you down.
Don't you hate these evangelists?
Yes, yes.
I'm happy as I am.
That's why my name's Bishop, you see.
Of course.
Richard made the comment that the Tennysons really engaged with the local community. I'll just relate a short story which was in the Mount Barker Courier after the Black Sunday fires. The Georges also related very well to the local community and were very popular. And each year Sir Robert George would go to the REGAL show, which was a major fixture in the Central Hills. The fire occurred approximately 6 weeks before the REGAL show. He still went to the show to open the show, and he said in his speech, "Due to unforeseen circumstances, I'm unable to exhibit my usual vegetables." Now, that's quite something, because when you see the Mount Barker Courier from that period, it really didn't have much coverage at all from East Torrens in it. So, yeah, it's a nice little reminiscent they had in there. Any other questions from the floor? No? Can I just have a quick word to Patricia?
While he's having a quick word to Patricia, I was expecting somebody to ask who my favourite governor was who used Marble Hill, but you didn't, so, yeah.
Who is your favourite governor?
No, you've restored my confidence in you, Patricia. Well, my favourite is Sir Malcolm Berkeley Harvey, who was probably the greatest restorer of the garden, as far as I can say. And he was laying out, this is what particularly appeals to me, he was laying out a miniature steam railway so that he could give the local children, it's a selfless act, the best time when they came for their annual picnic and open day. Yes, so there we are.
Thank you. Now, just to tell you what we're going to do from here, I'm going to call on Glenn Woodward to give a vote of thanks. We'll then get Richard to draw the raffle, and then we'll convene our AGM, which is usually pretty short, but we need to do it tonight. So, Glenn, I'll call on you to give a vote of thanks on our behalf.
Thank you, Richard. Sorry, I must watch my diction when I'm speaking to you, so I have to be careful. You're one of our really wonderful presenters. We don't worry about the facts in history as long as we're entertained in history. Topics from Carrick Hill, heritage French apples, and now Marble Hill. The list of topics he presents almost endless. But he does make history interesting as well as amusing for all ages. He's wonderful with the young people too, because he's got wide experience and he really does do his research. I particularly like the way he kowtows to royalty. We've noticed that. So thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Glenn.
And we have a presentation for you. Maybe you can use that.